Last week, we looked at why it's impossible to plan an entire society or an economy or efficiently manage a major area of life and society like health or education. This week, I'm going to explain why people and nature are better left alone, ungoverned, and free to do what they want. I'm Chris, and this is what had to be said. It wasn't long ago scientists figured all systems had to have centers. Humans have brains, human societies have rulers and capital cities, ants and bees have queens. It just made sense, given their limited experience. But in the 20th century, they began to notice how many natural and human systems are leaderless or decentralized. There's no one telling bacterium how to behave. There's no ministry of ants coordinating all the others, certainly not the queen. There's no goose telling the other geese when to move to the front of the flying V. These systems are bottom-up systems, not top-down. And actually, as I explained 2 weeks ago, there's no one in control in human society either. And that's good. Our greatest strengths come out when no one is in control. Lao Tzu, the OG Taoist, noticed thousands of years ago, not only do people not need authority to tell them what to do, but such an authority tends to make everything worse. The more laws and restrictions there are, the poorer people become. The sharper men's weapons, the more trouble in the land. The more ingenious and clever men are, the more strange things happen. The more rules and regulations, the more thieves and robbers. Therefore, the sage says, I take no action, yet the people transform themselves. I favor quiescence, and the people right themselves. I take no action, and the people enrich themselves. I am without desires, and the people themselves are pristine. There's also Zhuangzi. He's also part of the Taoist canon. He put it another way. Horses live on dry land, eat grass, and drink water. When pleased, they rub their necks together. When angry, they turn around and kick up their heels at each other. Thus far only do their natural dispositions carry them. But bridled and bitted, with a plate of metal on their foreheads, they learn to cast vicious looks, to turn the head and bite, to get the bit out of the mouth or the bridle into it. And thus their natures become depraved. We're the horses, whipped into submission and corrupted by external forces like police and teachers and bosses and bureaucrats. My only real criticism of the Taoists is they thought it was possible to have passive rulers who just sat back and let their people thrive. History hasn't been very kind to that view. We're not going into any specific ways of solving specific problems like violence or the environment today. We're speaking generally. And generally speaking, things are better for most of us when we're left alone to decide what to do. Are people capable of doing what they think matters in the absence of a central decision-making authority or a monopoly on force? Of course. Are they capable of developing complex cultures and solving complex problems without being coordinated by someone on a higher level? You bet they are. You can look at the many stateless societies that have existed throughout human history, or consider how often riots and popular uprisings liberate public space from the constant threat of violence and turn it into an egalitarian society. You might not be familiar with any examples of what I'm talking about. so I'll make videos on them in the future. The reason we assume things need to be centralized and monopolized is that's the dominant idea of our society. But why? Who benefits from it? Why does everything and everyone have to be subject to someone else's decisions? The answer we've been brought up on is that if there's no central authority, gangs and warlords will form, and hierarchy will inevitably reemerge. So they're saying the problem with getting rid of hierarchy is that another hierarchy might take its place. That's the same problem as any centralizing of power. There's no real difference between a state and a gang but the size of its territory. Just like there's no real difference between a president and a warlord except the size of his military. This kind of thing's only inevitable if the people are passive and just let it happen. Free people need to vigilantly preserve their freedom. We'll never be able to achieve a lasting free society without enough people who believe in it fighting illegitimate authority. But even in societies like ours, where freedom is limited, we can get a glimpse into what a free society might look like. Let's go over some useful terms to describe how things work when they're unconstrained. Once you know the terms, you can research these things on your own, or you could just observe them around you. One term you could use is spontaneous order. Spontaneous here is the opposite of planned. Freedom, as Proudhon explained, is the mother, not the daughter, of order. Order is found in freedom. Spontaneous order is used to describe all kinds of phenomena, from the development of the universe and the movement of planets, the evolution of life on Earth, the weather, crystal structure, ant colonies, beehives, flocks of birds, schools of fish, the development of cities, how traffic moves, scientific progress, culture, social customs and rules, the development of language, and even the cooperation of our cells in our bodies. None of these phenomena are commanded by an individual, but rather conform to the basic laws laid down, and then kind of figure things out for themselves within those laws. A term you often see next to spontaneous order is emergence, where order can emerge from what appears to be chaos. You could look at how a form of sign language tends to emerge among deaf children who've never seen official sign language before, which I talked about in my video 3 weeks ago or so. And all children come up with games and other ways of amusing themselves without adult intervention. Or take ants. If you take ants from different colonies and you kind of throw them in together, it won't take long for them to figure out what their roles are and what to do. In fact, in the book Emergence, to which, of course, there's a link in the description, you can read about the fascinating emergence of order among ants. Without leaders and without language, ants put together into one colony, decide where to put the trash heap and where to pile the dead ants in a kind of cemetery. With mathematical precision, they had put, in this example they use in the book at least, they'd put the cemetery at its furthest point from the colony and the trash heap at a maximum distance from both the cemetery and the rest of the colony. As the author of that book, Stephen Johnson, put it, it was as if they'd solved a spatial awareness math test. No single ant, however, could have just worked it all out. Ants use their local, specific knowledge and receive immediate feedback from their environments. All kinds of natural phenomena work this way, as scientists are beginning to find out. Spontaneous order and emergence are usually considered along self-organization, which is mostly used in the hard sciences to describe how non-hierarchic systems and networks function in nature. For humans, we've also got the term self-management. The idea there, as you could probably guess, is you don't need general managers and presidents and so on to make an organization run properly. The ideal is an egalitarian organization, horizontally organized, so no one person or small group is ultimately in charge. There are lots of cooperatives and communes that are run this way, even entire societies, hence the title of this video. But you see it in other human phenomena too, like revolutions, which, despite how they're often portrayed, are really bottom-up affairs. Most communal life is like that too, especially in big cities. I was always fascinated being in Cairo watching the comings and goings of the buses. Most buses are privately run, but they go everywhere at all times and they're super cheap. There's no scheduler, no one telling them where to go, no one dictating prices. Things just kind of fall into place. Sometimes people call this ordering process the natural order of things, or what they mean when they talk about balance in nature. That's one thing I've always liked about Taoism, its way of understanding nature in a way that most scientists would barely notice for 2,000 years. I might refer to the Tao rather than the natural order, because saying something is natural gets used to justify all kinds of non sequiturs. There's no morality or purpose to the Tao. It's just kind of the way things are. You could also use the term anarchy. Obviously, anarchy is synonymous with chaos, which was a propaganda decision used to discredit anarchism. Anarchy also means no rulers, no social class that has the power to systematically oppress and rob the rest of us. For our purposes, spontaneous order, self-organization, and anarchy are synonymous. Anarchy is more common than you think. Your relations with your friends are probably anarchic, with no one telling you how to behave and think all the time, and everybody equally empowered to tell you off for violating norms. There might be a leader, sure, but with friends, a leader is one who makes a suggestion about where to eat and encourages people to go there, not one who uses violence to threaten you. We in a society are subject to all kinds of rules, but within those rules, we can associate with whomever we want, without a leader telling us who should be our friends or who we should associate with, how we should act towards them. We've already got the knowledge necessary to make friends. It's true of all kinds of other social phenomena. Now, all these ideas, spontaneous order, emergence, self-organization, anarchy, they're not fully fledged scientific theories on their own that you can just apply to all phenomena and predict specific outcomes. That's not really what they're for. Think of them more as broad observations about the way the world works and the benefits of decentralization. Decentralization is good for many areas of life. Not all, it's true. As I said in my last video, I think it was, a plane is necessarily a centralized or top-down system, the dictatorship of the pilot. A car is driven by one person, not everyone in the car. But many systems in nature are complex and bottom-up. Like I explained last week, our individual knowledge, however limited and specific to the things that we know, is the key to the magic of spontaneous order. The internet is perhaps the best tool for unleashing spontaneous order that we've ever come up with. And now that you know about this idea, you'll be able to see it everywhere, certainly everywhere on the internet. Anything open source, like Wikipedia, depends on the contributions of various people working independently. Yes, Wikipedia has its issues, it's not perfect, and how could it be? We should still think critically about what we read there, just like all other information we receive. It's still far more wide-reaching and quicker to update than any other encyclopedia, and it's roughly as accurate. And that's not all thanks to Jimmy Wales, the founder of Wikipedia, but thanks to thousands of individual contributors. The same could be said about YouTube or other social media. Of course, the internet is not a perfect example of spontaneous order or anarchy. It's not anarchic. It's dominated by large corporations, and law enforcement claims the power to inspect and even remove all kinds of things. If you're on YouTube, you're subject to YouTube's rules and can be downvoted and removed for breaking them. Same with Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever. But everything has limits. Systems and situations have rules. It's okay to have rules for your platform, just like the universe is governed by laws of physics. But within its parameters, you have your own platform for saying what you want. Think about everything people on YouTube have done for us. People build homes from YouTube videos. I'm free? Is that the word? To make a channel accessible to anyone with an internet connection, even though it's something that would likely be unpopular with most rich people or agents of the state. We can even use social media for organizing. Uprisings in places like Iran and Egypt have credited Facebook and Twitter for making it possible to organize on their platforms. I've also always been fascinated with the evolution of memes. Memes are easy to make, so as long as you have a computer and a witty idea, you can make a meme. So thousands and thousands of people make new memes or modify old ones every day. And they provide humor or maybe encouragement or just facts in more and more eye-catching ways. They blow corporate advertising out of the water because advertisers still operate on this old-fashioned top-down paradigm. So they keep making commercials and billboards no one cares about, telling people about their products, rather than engaging them with something better. Crowds tend to have a bad reputation. We think of them as mindless herds that can be easily influenced or spooked. But not when they're decentralized. When they're decentralized, crowds can be exceptionally intelligent. You don't need an expert if you've got a crowd of independent thinkers or decision makers. Humans thinking separately about one problem will probably arrive at the optimal solution. For instance, you alone might have no idea how many candies are in a jar, but the average of everyone's guesses is likely to be roughly accurate. If everyone's guesses or opinions or whatever input are aggregated, we're likely to get the best outcomes in that system. If everyone lived and worked in free local communities and learned from each other, we could have continuous improvement while just working locally. You've read the book, The Wisdom of Crowds, right? Check it out. Lots of good examples there. And in all the books in the description. Either way, if you wanted to understand why the crowd comes to better decisions than the individual, you wouldn't find out just by interviewing them and examining their brains individually. Because the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. The wisdom of crowds could be a case for referendum as a way of deciding things. I've said elsewhere, most decisions should be made at the local level, so there's consensus rather than coercion. And there are other problems with referendums, like who says the question being asked is the right one, or who says there aren't better options we should be able to choose from. A referendum is often just a way of legitimizing what the government or some other interested party was going to do anyway. But it's also one way to make decisions that doesn't depend on hoping the interests of the people in power coincide with our own. I'd also recommend the book The Starfish and the Spider. It's kind of more of a business book in a sense, but It's really easy to read and gives just as good an explanation of these things as any other book. The example it uses that struck with me most was Apache resistance to colonization, especially of the Spanish. Now, if I get any of what I'm about to say wrong, I'm sorry, please correct me. I'm just going by the book. When the Spanish came to Central America, they made short work of Montezuma and Tenochtitlan, along with Atahualpa and Incan civilization too. Why? Because if you cut the head off a hierarchical society, which the Spanish did, you incapacitate it. Then they went to the Apaches. The Apaches didn't have a leader. They didn't have pyramids, roads, or even towns you could really go to. They were free people, most of whom resisted the conquistadors' attempts to settle them and convert them to Christianity. In the end, like all natives in North America, they've been settled and subjected to genocide. But they resisted for centuries. The Apaches succeeded so long because of the decentralized way they organized their society. There was no capital or a central command they all got orders from, so decisions were made all over. To quote the book, a raid on a Spanish settlement, for example, could be conceived in one place, organized in another, and carried out in yet another. You never knew where the Apaches would be coming from. In one sense, there was no place where important decisions were made. And in another sense, decisions were made by everybody everywhere. Bottom-up, decentralized systems are everywhere. We should have more spontaneous order or emergence or anarchy in human society and watch it flourish. Next week, I'll be giving some examples of self-managed societies, just so you know they exist. See you then.